Facets of Pallava Architecture. I would like to dedicate this lecture or this presentation to Dr. R. Nagaswamy, who was the legendary scholar in Indian art and architecture. The people of those who study temple architecture have to refer to Dr. Nagaswamy's work. So let's see, the Pallavas, they are known as Pallavas of Kanchipuram. So they are known as Pallava Dynasty. Who are these Pallavas? See, there are many, some of the different theories that has been proposed to find out the origin of these Pallavas. Some people also, they say that they are also belonging to one clan known as Pallavas. But it's very clear that Pallavas were the subordinates of the Shatavahanas in the Deccan. So all of you know that Shatavahanas ruled Deccan from 2nd century BC to 4th century CE. So during that period, they had many vassals and subordinates to support them in many ways. And Pallavas were the subordinates to Shatavahanas, and they were in that part of that is Deccan. That is why they first moved to Andhra Pradesh. First, they were tried to establish themselves in Andhra Pradesh, but later they moved down to south, that is to Tamil Nadu, in present Tamil Nadu, and particularly their capital was Kanchipuram. So they ruled Tamil Nadu part, that is Tondai Nadu. It was known as Tondai Nadu. So they ruled Tondai Nadu from 4th century to late 9th century Common Era. So that is the period of rule. More or less, they were contemporaries of Eastern Chalukyas, that is the Badami Chalukyas, who were ruling in that area, western part of India. Badami, Pattadakal, Aihole, Mahakuta, these were the areas. And they have extended their kingdom, even Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Andhra Pradesh. So they were very powerful dynasty, Chalukyas. And Pallavas were the contemporaries of the Chalukyas. And when we study the South Indian or Deccan early history, you will see that there used to be continuous warfare between Chalukyas and Pallavas for the supremacy of the entire South India or the Deccan. That is what we read in, and there are epigraphical references also. Some of the epigraphical references give us the information that how Pallavas, dominated the scenario, and sometimes they have defeated the Chalukyas. And in some instances, we also get to know that the Chalukyas have defeated the Pallavas. So like that, there used to be a kind of a competition between the two to establish the supremacy over the South India, that is the Deccan. So that is the scenario I'm giving you, how between the 4th and 9th century, before the Rashtrakutas come to power, these two were the major dynasties ruled whole of the Deccan. So they ruled Tondai Nadu from 4th century to late 9th century, and they were subordinates to Shatavahana in the Deccan. First, they were in Andhra Pradesh along with Shatavahanas, and then they moved down to south, that is in Tamil Nadu, the present Tamil Nadu proper, and it was the Kanchipuram. So we get references that A later Pallava king, that is Simhavarman, is mentioned in the Sanskrit Lokavibhaga, that is the text. He was, ruling in 436 CE. So we get this information that Simhavarman was one of the sorry, just a minute. One of the important ruler who was ruling in the 5th century. Then the Pallavas established themselves very firmly from the time of Mahendra Verman first. That is, between 600 to 630, there is no looking back of their power in South India. They established themselves. So he has contributed to the greatness of the Pallava dynasty. After him, his son Narasimha Verman, he conquered some of the territories that was lost during numerous Pallava Chalukya. As I said, the conflict between Pallavas and Chalukyas. Pallavas have lost some of the territories earlier to Narasimha Verman, even before Mahendra Verman. But Narasimha Verman reclaimed all those territories and he established as a very powerful ruler who was known as Mamala. So he was really a very powerful ruler, not only in confined himself to Tamil Nadu, he has established even extending to Far East, crossing India and setting up some of the in the Far Eastern area also. So they were the great builders. Now what we have to establish here is the Pallava dynasty. When we study the South Indian architecture, it shows that the Pallavas were the great builders. They constructed, they created a kind of, revolutionary movement in temple architecture. So some of, to set up the historical, backdrop, I would like to give you some of the very important rulers of Pallava dynasty who have contributed for the establishment of Pallava architecture, contributing kinds, such a thing that, before them, no one had thought that kind of architecture to be set up. So later dynasty, after 5th century, we tend to get Simha Vishnu as an established, and he is known as the founder of the dynasty which ruled for a longer period of time. He was a great conqueror and he established his capital at Kanchipuram. So Kanchi or Kanchipuram is one of the very important and significant place, not only as a capital, but it was also an educational center. So whenever we read ancient India universities like Nalanda and Takshila and all that, Kanchi or Kanchipuram come under in that list itself. So that shows that Kanchipuram had a great place culturally, very important, very significant role it has played in developing the entire South Indian or the Deccan art and architecture, literature, in all respects. So next to him is Mahendra Verman first. He was the son of Simha Vishnu, and as I said, he was the patron of Sanskrit and Tamil literature. Tamil literature becomes well-established thought process from the time of Mahendra Verman first. Before that also we tend to get in Sangam literature, the Tamil literature and its establishment. But in times of Mahendra Verman, it became one of the what we call it as Dravidian language. It becomes a Dravidian important language. He was also a patron of Sanskrit. He was an author in Sanskrit of a drama known as Mattavilasa Prahasana. So it is a comedy drama which he himself has written. So he was a writer, he was a playwright, and he has written Bhagavad Juka, another text. Like that, he was a literate and having a very great taste for art and architecture. He built 5 cave temples, and one of the earliest one is Mandapattu, that we will see here. It is the earliest cave temple down south. It's already in Chalukyan area. In Badami, the 4 cave temples were already established. But in south, it was Mahendra Verman first who has established or who has excavated the cave temple, and he has given the impetus to Pallava style of architecture. So from him, the Pallava style of architecture has just begun. Next to him is Narasimhavarman first, the son of Mahendra Verman, and he is a contributor for the second phase of the temple architecture or in Pallava country, and he chooses a center known as Mahabalipuram, which was known as Mamalapuram in those days, and he was a great wrestler. Mamala, the meaning of Mamala is a great wrestler. His name was Narasimhavarman, and he was named the place, that is Mahabalipuram, was named after him as Mamalapuram. He was patron of art, and he built Mahabalipuram cave temples. You must have seen in the pictures, or you must have visited Mahabalipuram. There are several temples which were known as structural cave temples built by him. So during his times, Huyen visited Kanchipuram in 640 CE. So it is a significant visit, and Huyen has written in detail the entire scenario of Kanchipuram when he visited in 640. Next to him is Mahendra Verman II. He was an efficient and capable ruler, known for his military exploits. That is where he started developing, even in Tamil Nadu or Tondai Nadu, he started extending the Pallava empire in his times. So that is why he is established as a very capable ruler. I mean, Mahendra Verman II and then Parameshwara Verman first. Both of them, they were extending the Pallava territory beyond Kanchipuram and much more. So next, what we find a very important ruler was Narasimhavarman II. So it is third phase of Pallava architecture starts from his time. So Narasimhavarman II is also known as Rajasimha. So he ruled in 695, and he was one of the greatest rulers. And he constructed Kailasanatha Temple at Kanchipuram and Shore Temple at Mahabalipuram. We'll see all those details one by one. So his contribution is very significant because the Dravida style of architecture develops from his times. Parameshwara Verman II, he ruled from 728 to 731. But he was killed by the Chalukya king Vikramaditya II. So Vikramaditya II, he defeated him and he killed him, and he has occupied even Kanchipuram. So one of the inscription, it is on the pillar of Kailasanatha Temple, Kanchipuram. I'll explain you when we are talking about Kailasanatha Temple, Kanchipuram, about this inscription issued by Vikramaditya II. So he was the last ruler of the Simha Vishnu line of Pallavas. So we have seen that Simha Vishnu was the founding ruler of Pallava Dynasty. Starting from there to 731, Parameshwara Verman, the first line of Pallava rulers ended. Nandivarman II, he was from a different line, ruled from 720 to 796. So almost 55 years. It's a long rule. And he was also, partly responsible for introducing, once again, Buddhism in...
Excuse me, madam. Your slide is
Yes?
not, your slide is fixed now.
No.
It is not moving.
No, I'm talking about that only. We'll
Sorry.
go to next. Yes.
Okay,
yeah. So Nandivarman is an important ruler. Then comes Dantivarman. He was the son of Nandivarman II. He also ruled for a long period of time, 51 years. Then Nandivarman III was the son of Dantivarman. And he was also a very powerful monarch. And he had a powerful navy. That is what, we have to give the credit to Nandivarman III. And he has traveled the trade transaction he has established in Siam and Malaya. And the last ruler of Pallava dynasty is Aparajita Varman. From there, the Pallava dynasty closes. So by 9th century, end of 9th century, Pallavas are not to be seen in Tamil Nadu. So coming to, with this historical timeline, you know that, how Pallavas established themselves from Andhra Pradesh to Kanchipuram and extended their empire and settled themselves. Pallava temple architecture can be classified into 4 phases. The first phase is Mahendra style group. As we mentioned, it is basically rock cut architecture. You find in the cliff of the mountain, an architecture is hewn. It is constructed. You know that, they have to, it's a very, very difficult technique of excavating the cliff. And that is what we have, rock cut architecture in Pallava country. And he was earlier a Jaina, and Mahendra Verman first, he become Shaiva later. So early rock cut architecture belongs to this phase. The second phase is Mamala styles group. That is from 640 to 690 CE. So this was like rock cut, but structural. We'll see when we see the examples, you will understand what do you mean by rock cut structural. So it is Shaiva and Vaishnava cave architecture we find there in Mahabalipuram. Basically, his site was Mahabalipuram. The third is Rajasimha style. That is known as the Narasimhavarman II. He has established a kind of architecture which is known as structural temple architecture. So he supported Shaiva and Vaishnava faiths, and temples were built for Shaiva and Vaishnava faiths. And the fourth phase of architecture is Nandivarman Group. It's basically in Kanchipuram and around, and they are structural temples. There is no more any cave temples after that. Once Rajasimha moved from cave architecture to structural temple, we don't find any cave architecture or rock cut architecture in Pallava country. So these are the 4 phases of Pallava temple architecture. Now this is the first Mandapattu caves of Mahendra Verma first. As I said, he built in 5 places and he gave impetus to Pallava style of architecture. You can see here a cliff of the mountain has been hewn, excavated in the form of temple structure, having the pillars, the 2 Dwarapalakas, and inside they have to go and there will be a chamber for the Garbhagriha. That's all. It cannot be more than that because they were not very sure what would be the depth of that, cliff or the mountain. So this is the very early stage of rock cut architecture. It is known as rock cut architecture, and you know that India is known for the rock cut architecture. It is one of the great wonders in the world. Then we also have other, number of caves are there in Mamandur cave temples, continued with Mahendra Verma first. And now you see the typology of the pillar, one base, and then middle part and the capital. That's all. They have not created any embellishment or anything. It was a simple, pillars, either 2 or 4 or 8, depending on the space available for them to excavate. So another little, you can see here the designs and other things in the second slide. That was Dalvanor cave temple. You find the kudus, that is the kind of decorative motifs they have introduced, along with the steps they have introduced. So like this, one by one, they try to introduce certain parts of temple architecture, which becomes so common in later times. But these are all the early movement and early development of temple architecture, particularly the rock cut caves of Mahendra Verman first. Mahendra Verman is also known, he was a great musician himself. So there is one inscription, maybe this is the first very important inscription on music. So it is known as Kurumiya Malai inscription. A part of the cliff has been dedicated to the Ganapati, and then an inscription runs next to the image of Ganapati. So it is discovered on the rock wall of the cave. Rudracharya, the guru of Paramadhishwara, Mahendra. So he has dedicated this to his guru, Rudracharya. And the king composed this notation in Sankirna Jati, Grantha Script. The script of the inscription is Grantha. And because the Grantha Script, you must be knowing that the lipi will be in Tamil or Malayalam or any other language, but the content will be in Sanskrit. So it is a Grantha Script we find here, and he mentions in detail, it's a long inscription, and he mentions in detail the notations, various notations of the composition, the content, the swaras, and all those things have been mentioned there. And there is jati, is like, it is like a rhythm. There are several rhythms. It can be 3, it can be 4, it can be 5, it can be 7, it can be 9. 9 is the most complicated. For example, I can just give you a kind of example to understand. If you say 3, takita, 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 that is 3. If you say 4, takadimi, takajanu, takadimi, takajanu, 4, 4. Takadimi, takajanu, takadimi, that is 4. When it comes to 5, it will be taka, takita, taka, takita, taka 2, takita 3, taka, takita, taka, takita. This is 5, pancha. 7, sapta, takita, taka, dimi, takita, taka, dimi, takita 3, taka, dimi 4, takita, taka, dimi. This is 7. And this is Sankirna, that is 9. Taka, dhimmi, taka, takita, taka, dhimmi, taka, takita. So like this. So he has given the most complicated notation in Sankirna Jati in Grantha Script. It was deciphered in 1904. Till then, people were not knowing about this Kurumiya Malai inscription. So it was deciphered by H. Krishna Shastri and Bhandarkar. They both went and excavated that. And there are total 38 lines. That's why I said it's a long inscription. And after that, a detailed study was conducted and deciphering each notation of that by P. Sambamurthy. He is a great musician, and he has written a book on musical instruments. One of the famous book of P. Sambamurthy is musical instruments. He talks about all musical instruments that you see in the sculptures in 1926. Also, C. Meenakshi has continued this study. And R. Satyanarayana is one of the musicologists from Mysore. In 1967, he has given the reason, the way, how this Sankirna Jati can be understood. So a complete study of Kurumiya Malai inscription of 7th century by Mahendra Verman first is a great contribution to music, basically for the music. Now look at the typology of Pallava pillar style. Say for all architecture, you must be knowing that pillar plays a very important role. Not only for decorative purpose, they are also for the functional purpose, for load-bearing purpose, various purposes for putting a pillar on a crucial juncture. So here you can see that Pallava pillar style becomes a very significant. What they have done is, they have used it is also known as Mamala Pillar. It is Mamala. He has introduced this pillar style. That is why it is called as Mamala Pillar. It is a seated lion, or you call it as Vala image, very strongly seated as the base for the pillar, with properly decorative, the motifs around, and the very alert ears and eyes. You could see the kind of expression on this, and above that you have the middle part, and then the capital, and sometimes it can be a decorative capital, and sometimes it can be a very plain capital. But it's a very strong, the typology of the pillar, you can say that it is a very strong pillar that Mamala has introduced in Mahabalipuram. So whenever you see Mahabalipuram structures, you will see these pillars very prominently. Now this is Mamala style of architecture. So at Mahabalipuram, they are all structural temple forms. When you look at this, you will be confused whether it is a structural temple or it is a rock cut. It is actually a rock cut, but it is not part of the mountain. They are all separate boulders. So the boulders, when you see Mahabalipuram, when you go there, you can see lots and lots of boulders around. So what Mamala has done, has taken the boulder straight away, a huge boulder, and then introduced the temple architectural, units into it. You can see all the pillars are the Mamala pillars, the lion-based, pillars, and even the Shikara part, the Vimana, is having the tiers, like 4-tier, 3-tier, and on the top you have a kind of stupi. But what is interesting is they have experimented different kind of finial on the top of the shikara. So that is what is interesting. And the one very simple one you see, it is in the form of a ratha, and they call it as rathas. This structural temple that is excavated, in the boulder itself, huge boulder, and that becomes a ratha. So you have since there are 5 rathas or 5 structures, and they named it as Pandavas. So they have named each one ratha, but you don't have any iconography of Pandavas there. We are not very sure it was dedicated to Pandavas, but anywhere, if you see these 5 rathas, they are called as Pandava rathas. So the first one, the simple one with thatched kind of roof and a small steps getting in, it's looked like exactly a ratha. So it is a Draupadi ratha. Then there is, the next to that is Nakula Sahadeva ratha. The longer one, the huge one, broad-based, strong, is Bhimaratha. And this one with 4-tier and the stupi. This is the first, Mahendra first, and a very early, rock cut architecture. This is the second one, and little more embellishment has started, and they were comfortable in excavating the rock. And here you can see some more, motifs are added, and pillars are very clear. And this is the Kurumiya Malai inscription I spoke so much. Is on rock, the detailed inscription on music, the first inscription on music in India, I can say. And this is the typology of Pallava pillar style. Can you see now?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay. So this is the Pallava pillar style. You just notice whenever I'm showing some of the architecture, which is so significant, and the pillar concepts becomes very clear from this kind of pillars. That is Mamala. It is known as Mamala pillars. And this is where, we stopped, I think. The kind of rathas, the Pancharathas, actually, we don't have any kind of, evidences whether they really belong to Pandavas. But since they are 5 in number, they have been dedicated to the Pandavas. First is Draupadi Ratha, a very simple, like a thatched roof, and it is exactly like a Ratha. That is, when you come to South India and participate in chariot festival, you could see the reminiscence of this kind of Rathas there. And then you have Nakula Sahadeva Ratha, Dharmaraja Ratha, and Bhimaratha. Bhimaratha is quite big in size and also broad based and strong. You can also see their experimentation on the Shikara part, that is the finial, which has the stupi. In the north, when we see the architecture in Nagara kind of architecture, we have the Amalaka. But whereas in South Indian architecture, that is what we call it as Dravida, it is usually the stupi, the finial on the top of that. So this is the Arjuna Ratha. So the facade of the Ratha, that is facade of the wall, has been treated with various subjects. So that is where you start seeing the sculptural embellishment in many of the Mamala period architecture. So this is designated as Arjuna Ratha. You can observe the stupi on the top of the Dravidian architecture. So the beginning of Dravidian architecture very clearly you can see here, but it is not completely structural. It is a boulder, and that boulder has been carved into a temple. So Mahabalipuram caves are very interesting, and where you can see the concepts of Vishnu and his avatars. Here you can see the Varaha Avatara. One of the caves is dedicated to Varaha Avatara. So like that you can see the very clear formation of temple architecture with proper imagery. This is the contribution of Mamala, that is the Narasimha Verman first, who has created a kind of a very clear concept, ideology for temple architecture in Pallava country. Now you can see one example is a boulder. We were able to get this boulder in one of the place which is not completely carved, but they have made provision how to carve it. So that is the first picture you can see. And when they complete that boulder is carved, you will find like this, a ratha or a structural temple. It becomes a structure. And this is another example where you find on the top of it is having a good height. The boulder has got a good height and the base has been retained. The top portion has been carved into a architecture, a temple architecture. So very clear, specific Dravida concept has developed from this particular architecture. Another very interesting feature of Mamala style is a huge boulder. One of the huge boulders, they have not carved as a temple architecture, but they have used it for presenting a theme. That theme is the descent of Ganges, or what is known as Gangavatarana. So in this Gangavatarana panel, it's a huge panel. Maybe it goes more than 40 feet in width and more than 25 feet in height. In that part of the boulder, so many images, so many human beings, human Gandharvas, Kinnaras, and the Rishis, and so many sages are sitting and meditating or reading a Grantha. They are in their activities. So one Bhagiratha, he is trying to do the penance where the Ganges is supposed to descend. So that is the subject which has been carved by the sculptors, Pallava sculptors. You can see the way how the human anatomy is so free movement. Such free movement, I don't think we see in any other style of sculptures. And animal kingdom, they have represented animal kingdom also. It's not only just human beings. You have the elephants, lions, the cattle, even the monkeys are presented in this particular panel. So it is one of the very, very important panel to study the entire the Pallava style of sculptures. This is the best example that we have. This is in Mamala style. The same thing has been continued by the Rajasimha and Nandivarman and others continued the similar artistic aesthetic elements in carving or in sculpting the imagery. Now this is known as Tiger Cave in Mahabalipuram. This is the only cave which was excavated in Rajasimha period. So it is also known as Rajasimha Tiger Cave. See, it is a small cave. Probably, he thought of continuing the boulder, using boulders and excavating the structures and temples. Probably he thought he could continue. But during his time, the agamic texts have been compiled. Shaivagamas, there are 108 Shaivagamas are there, which have been compiled. And the saints and the scholars of his time, they started giving him a different kind of, how the concepts from Vedic, that is yagna and yagas, and that can be transformed to architecture. That was the concept which was earlier to him. You find that, we were not having such great temples around, but the yagnas were conducted. So those yagnas, now all those rituals which were conducted in yagnas have been transformed into agamas. And in the agamas, you find even now, if you open the agama text, you will have chapters on architecture, chapters on sculpture, chapters on vigraha, vidhi, how to consecrate the murti or the icon in the garbhagriha. All this information you get in the agamas, agama texts. So that was the period in Rajasimha's time. All these, yagna or the Vedic rituals were transforming into temple rituals. So he felt that, these boulders or constructing these small kind of temples will not provide or give sufficient space or function or the purpose for conducting such worshipping or praying or even creating all the rituals. So he felt that, there should be larger space and different kind of, how we can transform all these concepts of the yagna into rituals, that is the temple rituals. So that transformation you see in Rajasimha's period. So this is the only one cave which is attributed to him. So now we have the symbolism of temple form, how the temple form took, and what is the symbolism of the temple form. So Ananda Kumaraswamy mentions that the sacred structure is a microcosm, and it is nothing but a microcosm of everything what we think, especially in the way that, we worship the nature or the yagna or the Vedic. All this structure is a microcosm, and the whole world can be applicable to this concept of the sacred structure. So how the thought process integrated with space? For that you need a space. So that space is required to be studied, understood, symbolized. So he originated that kind of, originating from the Garbha, that is the sanctum, from where everything originates, the Garbhagriha or the sanctum. From there, the whole thing, that is the microcosm, and the whole thing, develops. So the Garbhagriha is compared with a womb from which all life emanates. Many of you must have already read in some references that it is compared to womb of a mother. So the Garbhagriha is a womb, and from there life emanates. How the life starts. So the darkness of the Garbhagriha convey the philosophical paradoxes. The Garbhagriha used to be always dark, only a light, a small, or the oil lamp used to be lit. So what does it convey? It conveys some of the philosophical paradoxes, from the unknown to the known. When you go there, everything is unknown to you. But if you stand before that, in that kind of, your, understanding of the world, you start knowing many things. From elaboration to the structural simplicity. When you start coming from outside to inside, you will see that there are so much of elaboration. There will be so many units of the temples. Facades will be there, Jagati, and so many things, Shikara and all that. But when you come to that Garbhagriha, it is just a simple structure, nothing else. So you start getting from elaboration, and what happens is finally to the simplicity. From multiplicity to unity. So when you are outside, you will be with multiple things. Maybe your ideas, maybe people, maybe things around, all these things. And when you come near that Garbhagriha and stand before that, you unify yourself with the image there. So that is what you mean by the Garbhagriha, the concept of Garbhagriha. And the darkness mean about that. And this is the philosophical understanding of the image which is placed in the Garbhagriha. So the successive enclosures in temple architecture lead to a heightened sense of focus in a suggestive introspection. So it is like a sequential procedures that you come and become one with the divine power installed in the Garbhagriha. This is what you mean by sacred structure, microcosm, and the world around you is a likeness. So when I see a Yaga Mantapa or Yagna Mantapa, you see that there are different units. Entrance, there will be one huge hall. From there, when you enter inside, there will be another sabha. From there, you go at the end, there will be a bird altar, which is known as Chayana. So there you will see the Agni is put on the Chayana, and the Vedic rituals will be offered. So Agni is propitiated. Agni is the mediator with human and the God. So that is how the transformation takes place. All these things from east to west. Entrance you will have in Yagna Mantapa, east, and at the end the Chayana is placed at the last end, edge of that is the west. So it is nothing but when you see the temple architecture also, you enter in east and touch yourself to the west, and there at the end you have the Garbhagriha. So that is why it is compared to this kind of Yagna Mantapa. So when you see a site plan of Kailasanatha Temple, Kanchipuram, which was constructed by Rajasimha. You see that the entrance is to the east, and then there will be the mantapas around. There are about 58 shrines around, and in the center you have different units of the temple. Entrance mandapa is there, and after that mandapa you have a pillared hall, then there will be vestibule, and finally a garbhagriha. So when you see that Yaga Mantapa and this, you have similarity, and even the functional use of it is similar to that. So there is a sacred tank, there is a Nandi Mantapa, and there is a sacred well. These are all part of that main temple. So this is the Kailasanatha Temple, Kanchipuram. That you have seen the ground plan, and here you can see that the Shikara, the first time a Shikara is very clearly brought out here. It is almost when you see the Dharmaraja Ratha of the Mamala Mahabalipuram, more or less the design and the tiers and the steps that they have taken is more or less, it continues here. But it is in a broader sense, elaborative manner. And there is a entrance mandapa that you see here, and a closed pillared hall, and then Vimana, what we call it as either Shikara or Vimana, that is on the Garbhagriha. And this side and in the back side, you see that they are all 58 shrines. So Garbhagriha and Shikara are aligned. So the focal point axially both in vertical and horizontal plane. Thus the Garbhagriha raising to Shikara is the metaphorical identity for a sacred space. So sacred space means not only just a foundation or just a Garbhagriha, but it also goes up to the Vimana, Shikara. And the treatment of Shikara is always a challenging to architect, master architect. What should be the size of that? What should be the width of that? Where the stupi has to be placed? And how many tiers it can take? What would be the load bearing capacity for that? So this is the first time such a huge Shikara, or what we call it as Vimana, has been placed on the Garbhagriha. So it is known as, why it is called as Meru. In Indian temple architecture, Meru is one of the, because in Brihat Samhita, Varahamihira gives 25 types of temple architecture. He lists all 25. Among them, Meru, Mandara are very early type of architecture, and there you see the Meru is like a Shikara. It is a Shunga. It is raising vertically from foundation to the top level. So this is what, when they offer Agni, the ghee and other things, when they do the Havan, the rituals, the Agni raises. So it is metaphorically, it shows that from the Garbhagriha, that Agni raises to the heaven. That is what the metaphorical understanding. So this is the entire concept of Kailasanatha Temple. First time it was constructed, transforming the Vedic rituals to the Agama rituals or the temple rituals. There is an inscription on the temple when you go into the entire temple from the left to right, when you take a round and come back, entire temple, there is about maybe about half a feet of the granite which has been used for writing the inscription, which is in the Grantha Lipi. You can see the features of the architecture here. The typology of Pallava pillar style changes here. There you had seen seated lion, but in Rajasimha pillars, it is the galloping lion. It is a Vyala only, but it is in the form of galloping lion. You can see all over, whether it is exterior, interior, or a part of the wall facade, the pillars, the Rajasimha pillars, are the galloping lions. So these are some of the Kailasanatha Temple, Kanchipuram, details. So Rajasimha conceived a structural form and regarded it as the sacred mountain Kailasa. You must be wondering why it is called as Kailasanatha Temple. So that means to say it is the abode of Shiva, that is Kailasa. So the central shrine and the rising Shikara architecturally represents the mountain Kailasa. So it represents almost like what is Kailasa. If you read the descriptions of Kailasa, it more or less correlates with the Kailasa that he had created in the form of architecture. So this structure is presided over by a central imposing Shivalinga. Inside, there is a very nice, Urdhva Shivalinga, and it's very interesting too. So the last few lines of the foundation inscription of Rajasimha reads as, "This towering shrine like a mountain, dedicated to Rajasimheshwara, by stealing the grandeur of Mount Kailasa and escalating like a skyscraper, may make a permanent abode of Lord Shiva." See, while naming it as Kailasanatha Temple, it is not a fancy name that he has given. In the inscription itself, it says that it steals the grandeur of Kailasa, the abode of Shiva. So when you walk around the temple, the 58 shrines I mentioned, you see the Shiva Leela. Suppose in the Kailasa, how Shiva, Parvati, Ganesha, Kartikeya, Nandi, they all spend their time. How they will be having their day. What are the kind of, flora, fauna, animal you see in Kailasa? These are all represented around. That is how he has dreamt about Kailasa, reading from the Shiva Purana, the Kailasa description, and his architects, they visualized and they created this Kailasanatha Temple. So Kailasanatha Temple, Kanchipuram, is like an embodying the entire universe, inclusive of natural substance also. Like you have animal kingdom, human beings, demons, gods and demigods, and heavenly celestials. What they are all doing there? They are performing their kriya. And they are also into prakriya. See, the whole life is kriya and prakriya. And that you can see that kind of, performance of kriya and prakriya, the process, the function, the understanding of this universe, the conceptualizing, all these things you can see in the campus or in this great place erected by Rajasimha. Kailasanatha Temple, some of the main shrine exterior walls. I'm just giving you some of the themes that they have, because the facade of the temple is used for representing the themes dedicated to the god that is consecrated in the Garbhagriha. So here it is the Shiva. So the Shiva Leela, or the various forms of Shiva, the reasons why he took those avatars, they are all represented on the walls. So this is one of the Lingodbhava Murti, and the theme, the story is associated with Brahma and Vishnu and Shiva, and beautifully represented there. And the other, you see the dancing Shiva and Vinadhara, or the Samhari, Shiva as Samhara Murti, and beautiful elephant. In most of the niches, you find a full-fledged, beautifully molded elephant sculptures around. The exterior walls, you have some more details here. This is another Ratharudha Shiva, is going for the Tripura Samhara. And you can see the other Devis with him, and galloping, as I mentioned, the pillar, Rajasimha pillar, slender they are, but number of pillars, cluster of pillars are used here. And here, Shiva is sitting and singing. As you have seen Kurumiya Malai inscription, as I mentioned, such a great inscription on music. So the here you can see Shiva as a great singer, and Mahishasura Mardini in another panel. And Shiva here as a Bhairava. There are many sculptures of Bhairava in this temple. So I presented one paper on Bhairava. So there are various forms of Bhairava also we can see here. And Shiva and Parvati, they are having their intimate time, in the Kailas. That is represented here. Some of the sculptures of Kailasanatha Temple, Kanchipuram, the Bhairava and Devis, Saptamatrukas, Mahishasura Mardini, several of them, and Adityas are represented. Several subjects are represented in the form of. So this is cosmic dance of Shiva. Is also interesting to see how they are represented on the walls of Kanchipuram. These are not from Kanchipuram, just to give an example. This is from Ellora, and these are from Kanchipuram. All the three, dancing Shiva in various Karanas. So they are very interesting forms, and these are from the Pattadakal, that is Badami Chalukyan dancing Shivas. It's also interesting to see that Kanchipuram Kailasanatha Temple has got some of the paintings belonging to Pallava period. Has been, it's not in a great preservation, but still you can see the reminiscence of these paintings in Kailasanatha Temple, in a structural temple. And this is another temple for Rajasimheshwara. Rajasimha has constructed in Mahabalipuram, the famous shore temple of Mahabalipuram. So it's more elaborate, having two, shikaras or two vimanas, which was earlier you have seen in Kailasanatha, there is only one vimana, but now you have two vimanas. So if you can see that in Dravida architecture, you find successive enclosures with successive shikaras and gopuras, maybe 7, maybe 9, maybe 11. Beginning is here. The two shikaras or two vimanas have been introduced in this shore temple. So it is just adjacent to the shore. And now, they have put the barricades and all that. The water cannot see, water cannot touch waves. Earlier, when I had gone there as in college days, it used to hit, the waves used to hit the temple walls. So these are some of the Rajasimha, some more pictures of, and one interesting concept Rajasimha very fondly introduced was Somaskanda. That is, he always appreciated the family of Shiva. So to show Shiva as a family person, he has created this Somaskanda, Shiva, Parvati, and the Kartikeya, the Skanda as a child, sitting between them, between Shiva and Parvati. So this you can see even the Garbhagriha of Kailasanatha Temple. So like that, he has introduced this Somaskanda. Later, in Chola period and later period, you see there are so many bronze sculptures with the Somaskanda theme. Another interesting, temple architecture you find in Kanchipuram itself, introduced by Nandivarman, the fourth phase of Pallava architecture, is Vaikuntha Perumal Temple. Perumal means God. So the Vaikuntha Perumal means the god of Vaikuntha. He is Vishnu. So this is a temple similar to the Kailasanatha Temple. In many ways, it has got similarity in the facade, in the pilaster, in designing the Vimana. But inside, he has experimented in a different way. That is why it has become another phase. So in Vaikuntha Perumal Temple, you will find 3 stories in the temple architecture itself. So one dedicated for seated Vishnu or standing Vishnu, central one for the reclining Vishnu, Ranganatha, and the third either seated or standing Vishnu. So the 3 postures of Vishnu has been placed in this particular temple. So this is one of the first Vaikuntha concept, having the Vaikuntha concept and creating a temple. You have seen Kailasa concept and Kailasanatha Temple. Here it is Vaikuntha. Later you see that there are many Vaikuntha Perumal temples in South India. And one of the greatest is Srirangam. Srirangam is called as the Vaikuntha of the earth, on the earth. So these are the interiors of the Vaikuntha Perumal Temple. He retained again the seated line Mamala typology of the pillar. He has not taken the Rajasimha type of pillar. This is convenient for the space availability. He has used this. And here you can see a corridor, and where you have in the whole corridor a row of pillars are there, and the other side there is a kind of story of how these Pallavas come to power. The entire story of the Pallavas up to Nandivarman, it has been excavated or sculpted as a relief sculptures throughout the corridor. And even you can see one of the temple shrine model they have created here, a very clear Dravida type of architecture. So to sum up, what you see here is the early Dravida temple architecture is the contribution of the Pallavas. So Pallava art and architecture represent an early stage of Dravidian art and architecture. It's starting with rock cut temples built between 695 to 722. That was known as Mahendra Group, which is known as Mahendra Verman first, who has constructed. The second group of rock cut monuments is known as Mamala Group, which is in Mahabalipuram. And as you have seen the rathas, the boulders are used in the form of the architecture. Independent shrine models have been created in Dravida nomenclature. And the third group is the structural phase. Very important. First time you see that a whole space is used for constructing the freestanding temples in the Pallava country. So it is known as structural phase, and the very great contributor is Rajasimha. That is why it is known as Rajasimha style. And he has based all his structures on Agama texts. Even in Kailasanatha Temple, Kanchipuram, you find the epithets of Rajasimha is in the form of inscriptions, all epithets. So according to Agama concepts, even those epithets have been mentioned there. And the fourth group, what you see is Nandivarman Group, and most of them are the structural temples. They have not constructed the rock cut again, and they are all Vaishnava structures. Nandivarman was a staunch devotee of Vishnu, Mahavishnu, and even he promoted Buddhism in Pallava country. And I think I have done justice